What happens when someone tells you on live television? You saved my life, but you don't remember. Stop the tape. Dr. Phil's voice cut through the studio like a knife. The cameras froze. The audience held its breath. A woman stood in the middle of the aisle, trembling, holding a folded letter in her hands. You saved my life 20 years ago, she said, her voice breaking. And you have no idea who I am. What Dr. Phil did next would change everything anyone thought they knew about the power of a single moment. The show had started like any other Tuesday taping. Dr. Phil was addressing a family struggling with addiction, a mother, her adult son, and the grandmother who'd been enabling them both. Standard territory for the show. The conversation was heated but controlled, moving through the familiar beats of confrontation, denial, and slowly emerging truth. Dr. Phil had just turned to address the studio audience, asking if anyone had experienced similar family dynamics, when it happened. A woman in her mid-40s stood up. She wasn't raising her hand to share an opinion. She was standing with her entire body shaking, tears streaming down her face, holding something tightly in her hands. Dr. Phil, she called out, her voice barely audible over the microphone. Dr. Phil, please. I need to tell you something. The control room signaled to keep rolling, but Dr. Phil's instinct kicked in immediately. Something was different about this moment. He could feel it. Hold on, he said to the family on stage, then walked down the steps toward the woman. What is it? The studio went completely silent. 20 years ago, the woman began, her voice trembling. I was 17 years old. I was sitting in my bedroom with a bottle of pills. I'd written goodbye letters to my parents. I was going to end my life that night. The audience gasped. Dr. Phil stopped mid-stride, his expression shifting from curiosity to intense focus. But I turned on the TV, she continued, tears flowing freely now. And you were there. You were talking about a teenage girl who felt exactly like I did. And you said something that night, something so specific, that made me put those pills down. Dr. Phil's face transformed. The cameras captured every micro-expression, the initial confusion, the dawning realization, the wave of emotion he was fighting to control. You said your life is not a rough draft. This is not a practice run. And the world needs exactly who you are supposed to become. The woman's voice broke completely. I wrote those words down. I've carried them with me every single day since then. She held up the folded letter, now worn at the edges, clearly read and reread thousands of times. Dr. Phil did something he'd never done in over 20 years of television. He stopped the production entirely. Stop everything, he said to the control room, his voice thick with emotion. Stop the cameras. Stop the clock. I don't care what we're scheduled to do. This is what we're doing now. The producers didn't hesitate. In the control room, executives who'd seen thousands of episodes knew immediately this was different. This was real in a way that transcended television. Dr. Phil walked directly to the woman, stepping past crew members, past floor directors, past every protocol the show had ever followed. He stood in front of her, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. What's your name? He asked softly. Sarah, she whispered. Sarah Mitchell. Sarah, Dr. Phil repeated, his voice breaking slightly. May I see that letter? She handed it to him with shaking hands. He unfolded it carefully, like it was the most precious document in the world. The cameras, still rolling despite the stop order, because the director knew this was history, zoomed in on his face as he read. What was written on that paper would bring the most stoic man on television to tears. The letter was in teenage handwriting, written in blue ink that had faded over 2 decades. Dear future me. If you're reading this, it means you didn't do it. It means Dr. Phil's words saved you tonight. It means you chose to see what you're supposed to become. Remember this feeling. Remember that someone you've never met cared enough to say exactly what you needed to hear. Pass it forward. Save someone else the way he saved you. Love. 17-year-old Sarah who chose to live. Dr. Phil looked up from the letter, and cameras caught something audiences had rarely seen, tears streaming down his face. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely controlled, "I need you to know something. I don't remember that specific show. I wish I did. But what I do remember is why I do this work. It's for exactly this reason. It's for you. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead." Dr. Phil turned to his producers. "Bring her family here. Right now. I don't care where they are or what they're doing. Get them here." The family on stage, the original guests, were crying along with everyone else. The grandmother spoke up. "Dr. Phil, we can wait. This is more important." Within 15 minutes, through a production miracle, Sarah's parents were on FaceTime on the studio's main screen. They'd been contacted by producers who'd tracked them down through Sarah's registration information. Sarah's mother appeared on screen, confused and worried. "Sarah? Baby, what's wrong? Are you okay?" "Mom," Sarah said, looking at the screen while still holding Dr. Phil's hand. "I need to tell you something I never told you. 20 years ago, the night before my 18th birthday, I almost didn't make it. But someone on TV said something that saved me. And he's here. And I finally got to thank him." Her mother's face crumpled. Her father, visible beside her, put his head in his hands. "We never knew," her mother whispered. "Sarah, we never knew." "I know, Mom," Sarah said gently. "I couldn't tell you then. But I needed to tell someone. I needed to tell him." Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. He turned to the family on stage. "I'm going to ask you something, and you can absolutely say no. But would you be willing to share this moment with Sarah? Would you be willing to hear her full story? Because I think what she went through, and what she survived, might be exactly what you need to hear right now." The mother on stage nodded immediately. "Yes. Please. We need to hear this." For the next hour, the scheduled show format disappeared entirely. Dr. Phil sat with Sarah, her parents on video, and the family on stage, creating an impromptu group session about survival, hope, and the invisible threads that connect us. Sarah shared her story fully for the first time. The depression that had consumed her teenage years. The isolation she'd felt. The night she decided to end it all. And the moment, that specific moment, when Dr. Phil's words on television had created a crack in her darkness large enough for light to get through. "I didn't get help right away," Sarah admitted. "But I got through that night. And the next night. And eventually, I got through enough nights that I could finally ask for help." Dr. Phil listened with his full attention, occasionally asking questions, but mostly just creating space for Sarah's truth. But what happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a small box. "Dr. Phil, there's something else I need to tell you. That letter, the one I wrote to myself, it's not the only one. Over the last 20 years, every time I've felt that darkness coming back, I've written another letter. Letters to myself. Letters to my future children. Letters to strangers who might need them." She opened the box. Inside were dozens of folded letters, each dated, each written during a moment of struggle and survival. "But last month," Sarah continued, "I wrote a different kind of letter. I wrote one to you. Because I knew I was going to be in Los Angeles. I knew your show taped here. And I bought a ticket to be in this audience because I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd get a chance to tell you what you did for me." She pulled out a fresh envelope from the box and handed it to Dr. Phil. "This letter isn't about thanking you. It's about telling you why your work matters more than you could ever know." Dr. Phil opened the envelope with shaking hands. As he read silently, the cameras captured his journey through every emotion: shock, disbelief, overwhelming gratitude, and finally, complete devastation in the most beautiful way. When he looked up, he could barely speak. "Sarah, this letter, you've helped over 300 people?" She nodded. 327, actually. That's how many people have told me that my letters I leave in libraries, coffee shops, hospital waiting rooms, help them choose to stay. I sign everyone the same way, from someone who was saved by a stranger's words. The studio erupted in applause so loud it shook the cameras. Dr. Phil looked at Sarah, then at her parents on screen, then at the family on stage, then out at the audience. For a man who'd built a career on having the right words, he was speechless. Finally, he spoke. You know what the most powerful thing about this is? I didn't save your life, Sarah. You did. Those words I said, they were just words until you decided to let them mean something. You chose to hear them. You chose to believe them. You chose to live. And then you chose to pass it forward 327 times over. Sarah shook her head. But I wouldn't have had the chance to choose if you hadn't said them. That's what I needed you to know. Your words created the possibility. I just walked through it. Dr. Phil pulled a business card from his pocket. Sarah, I want you to have this. This is my personal line to our foundation. I want to help you expand what you're doing. These letters you're writing, we can get them to more people. We can train others to do what you're doing. We can create a network. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. He turned to the cameras. And to everyone watching, whether you're here in this studio or at home, I want you to understand something. Sarah's story isn't unique because it's rare. It's unique because she's brave enough to tell it. There are thousands of Sarahs out there. Thousands of moments where one person's words, one gesture, one choice to show up creates a ripple effect that saves lives. The family on stage stood and approached Sarah. The mother who'd been struggling with addiction looked at her directly. I'm going to get help. Today. Because if you could survive what you survived, I can survive this. Sarah hugged her, both women crying. Dr. Phil stood back, letting the moment unfold naturally. Sarah's parents, still on screen, were openly weeping. Her father finally spoke. Dr. Phil, we can never repay you for what you did. You gave us 20 more years with our daughter. You gave us grandchildren we would never have met. You gave us a life we didn't know was at risk. Dr. Phil shook his head. I was just doing my job. But Sarah turned that moment into a mission. That's the real miracle here. As the taping finally wrapped, 3 hours later than scheduled, Dr. Phil made one final request. Sarah, can I keep this letter? The one you wrote to your 17-year-old self? She smiled through tears. Only if you promise to read it whenever you wonder if this work matters. I promise, he said. And I'm going to do something else. I'm going to make copies. I'm going to give one to every single person who works on this show. Because they need to know what we're really doing here. We're not making entertainment. We're creating possibilities. 6 months later, the impact was undeniable. The episode became the most watched in Dr. Phil's show history. Sarah became a spokesperson for mental health awareness, partnering with Dr. Phil's foundation to create a nationwide letter-writing campaign. The Letters for Strangers movement went viral, thousands writing encouraging messages and leaving them in public spaces. The original family from that episode credited Sarah's story as their catalyst for recovery. The mother entered rehab that same day and celebrated 2 years of sobriety. The letter became a symbol recognized worldwide. Dr. Phil had it professionally preserved and framed in his office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that words matter, that showing up matters, that we never know whose life we might touch. Mental health organizations used it in campaigns. It appeared on posters in counseling centers. It was referenced in suicide prevention training worldwide. Sarah's choice to listen to a stranger on TV created a movement that saved hundreds of lives. Dr. Phil understood this was why he'd spent decades doing this work, for the Sarahs who needed to hear their lives mattered. The letter proved that hope is portable, healing is possible, and sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is tell someone, your life matters. The world needs who you're supposed to become. But the story didn't end there. 3 years after that episode, Sarah's foundation had distributed over 50,000 letters in 47 states. Each letter was handwritten by survivors, people who'd faced their own darkness and chosen light. The letters appeared in hospital waiting rooms, library books, coffee shop bathrooms, college campuses, and subway stations. One letter, left in a Phoenix bus terminal, was found by a veteran struggling with PTSD. He later wrote to Sarah, "I was planning my exit strategy. Your letter gave me an exit strategy from the darkness instead." Another, tucked into a book at a Chicago library, reached a single mother drowning in debt and depression. She kept it in her wallet and read it every morning. "It became my daily reminder that I wasn't alone," she wrote. A high school student in Miami found one taped to a bathroom mirror. She'd been bullied relentlessly and saw no way forward. The letter became her lifeline. She graduated valedictorian and now runs anti-bullying programs. Dr. Phil kept every letter that came to his foundation, over 10,000 stories of lives saved by Sarah's movement. He created a special segment on his show called Words That Save, featuring people whose lives were changed by a single sentence, gesture, or moment of care from a stranger. Each episode ended the same way, with Dr. Phil holding up Sarah's original letter, now the symbol of the entire movement. "This piece of paper," he'd say, "represents the truth that none of us are ever really alone. That our words matter. That showing up, even in small ways, creates ripples we'll never fully see." Sarah's parents, who'd learned that day in the studio how close they'd come to losing their daughter, became fierce advocates for mental health awareness. Her father spoke at schools across the country, always carrying a copy of Sarah's letter. If your child seems distant, he'd tell parents, "Don't wait. One conversation could be the difference." The family from that original episode, the ones who'd been bumped to make room for Sarah's story, stayed connected with Sarah. They appeared together at mental health conferences, their intertwined stories showing how one moment of vulnerability could transform multiple lives simultaneously. The impact rippled in ways no one anticipated. Therapists began incorporating letter writing to your future self into treatment plans. Schools implemented letters of hope programs where students wrote encouraging notes to peers. Crisis hotlines trained volunteers to help callers write survival letters to themselves. Dr. Phil's production team reported that since Sarah's episode, they'd received thousands of letters from viewers sharing how the show had impacted them, stories they'd never told before. The episode had given people permission to speak their truth, to acknowledge their struggles, to celebrate their survival. Because you never know who's listening. You never know whose life you might save with a single moment of honesty and care. You never know that 20 years later, someone might stand in your studio, holding a letter that proves your words created the possibility for them to choose life. And in choosing life, they created possibilities for hundreds of others to do the same.